We must just get the sound right, not too loud.
Are you comfortable?
Yep.
Can you just walk around and just so that we just test that it's picking up the...
Yep, I'll do that. Just leave that here. Can you hear me? Is that okay? It's not too loud? African lion can roar. Okay.
This is the red part. This is the clicker. The red one.
That's the red part.
Clicker, and then that's front and back.
Okay. And are we starting on time?
Yeah, hope to.
You've got people who are online, so you need to.
Paragila. ಅದು ಇದ್ರೆ okay. ಇಲ್ಲ ಬೇಡ ಪರವಾಗಿಲ್ಲ. You can sit.
I can sit. Sit. Okay, where's my phone?
Muted there.
I'm just going to go to the bathroom quickly.
Yeah. Then can I just take this out?
Turn that off.
Good evening. This is XChange's third event. We had Edgar de Mello and a group of Bangalore-based architects, including George Atokaran, Avinash Ankalge, Collage, BNA, Purple Ink, Reading Grounds, Samvad, and Sujit, SDEG, and Cadence present Pechakucha style in February. Peter Stutchbury gave a lovely lecture and was in conversation with Sujit and Smaran in July. And today we have Peter Rich with us, talking about his incredible drawings and their evocation of embodied experience. XChange was started by 3 firms together, Cadence. There is some feedback. I have live stream on my phone, sorry. Yeah, we're just learning all this stuff. Anyway, so we started XChange, SDEG, Cadence, and our office, 100 Hands. And so, of course, Sujit and Aruna are here from SDEG, Smaran is here, and Sunitha and I are here from 100 Hands. We started it as a platform for conversations on design and architecture, and we are supported by the wonderful patronage of PC Sampath Co. and Ram Ceramics. Thank you for enabling these events. Siddharth Prakash is here. I would like to request Peter Rich to hand over a copy of his monograph to him as a token of our appreciation.
Thank you. Is he coming forward?
Yeah, he's on his way.
Am I on mic? Okay. Thank you very much for supporting architecture as an art.
As always.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure meeting you.
Okay.
So this evening, we have a lecture by Peter Rich. Peter Rich is a celebrated architect and teacher based in Johannesburg in South Africa. Celebrated for winning the World Building of the Year 2009 for the Mapungubwe Interpretation Center and exhibiting his drawings at the 2018 Venice Biennale, Peter's studio brings African design excellence to a global stage. Peter has been visiting India since 2012, I think, and has made over 30 trips over these 13 years. I first came to know of him through Kevin Fellingham, my wonderful colleague at MIT. He showed me that incredible heritage center at Alexandra, which we got to see, a public building making a metaphorical bridge in that dense, neglected part of the city, and with a rare quality of intimate space and delicacy for this rough environment. Visiting it recently with Peter, I saw firsthand the care with which the building was put together and the great erudition informing its gestalt and its details. What was also striking was Peter's connect with the local residents, having spent years here personally documenting in astounding detail all the buildings within the heritage precinct. Kevin also showed me Peter's incredible architectural drawings, handmade, with very particular human figures and a delightful quality of gradient and depth. Soon, I was copying Kevin's drawings, who was obviously invoking Peter in his. Thanks to Masa, many years later, I met Peter in India, but all I remember from that time was Peter's inimitable dancing at the after party. His energy and enthusiasm are infectious, and over the course of these many visits, he has seen more of our country than most of us, and has made long-lasting connections across vast geography, our vast geography, linking aspiring students to reticent teachers and establishing shared interests among so many of us practicing today. He has been a source of inspiration and encouragement for a legion of younger practitioners here, and thanks to his generous spirit and wise counsel, so many of us have found direction and confidence to keep going. Peter was invited to the Frame Conclave this year, and his lecture on drawings was the standout there. He was planning to show us something different this evening, but we have requested him to do an encore of that incredible lecture. His drawings bring us our India anew. I'm so excited Peter is here with us today, and invite him to make his presentation.
What a pleasure, an honor to be here, and thank you, Saba. I was here when this was a ruin being measured up by the team from 100 Hands, and now I see it functioning and actually talk in it. It's totally amazing. I've got a long talk, so I've just had an incredible trip and 2 weeks of teaching at Avani and Vadia, both which have 10 years of tradition from having started and are busy trying to review their way forward. And you're all part of that because you enrich those institutions. Okay, that's better with the light off, thank you. I'm pleased you chose this drawing for the poster. That was Ruturaj Parikh of frames, because usually when I go to the mill owners, I'm too in awe to be able to draw. I'm almost paralyzed. But more recently, when I went on my 5th visit, I somehow just managed to get into communicating what that meant to me. And there were 2 drawings. Whoops. I put this here because I'm curious, I immerse myself in the situation, and I live in the present. And to draw enriches one's autobiography of space and place. I was dyslexic as a young child. In those times, in the 50s, they didn't really recognize that, so I took solitude in drawing. It was my dream state, and my best school report was the one in Standard 2, which was Peter's an artist, a dreamer, and a clown, okay? And 2 of my sons also had the same dyslexia, and we were all spatially very advanced and actually quite grateful that we went through that journey. So that's part of the background behind what one did. But living in the present is important, immersing yourself is important, and being curious is important. And drawing is one of the intelligences and ways of doing that. I spoke in the Plan magazine edition I did 160 in February on 32 young practices. I wrote an article about gift exchange and standing on the shoulders of the past. That's what India's taught me, basically. And I'm going to refer to just 3 gurus. And the first one is Pancho Geddes. He died in 2015. Peter Cook described him as the most, in his opinion, the most creative person he had ever met. And he practiced from Mozambique. He was Portuguese. He trained at my alma mater, originally from Oporto. And he was really the Picasso of Africa. And he claimed that for architects, the right and liberties that painters and poets have held for so long. That's modeled on a manifesto done by Charles Rennie Mackintosh, but with his own typeface. This is his Habitable Woman. This is one of the Smiling Line trilogies, but you can see the way he drew. And he always phoned me up and said, "How are your drawings?" The poetic inquiry through drawing accounts for a better architecture. And I met him in 1964 when I started architecture, and just prior to that eloped with my then girlfriend, who's been my wife for 61 years. And we met Pancho, and he transformed my life because he actually made me look at contemporary African art and traditional African art, and he held community workshops within squatter camps. And he made me aware that I was in an African context, even though my French Huguenot ancestry came to our country in 1699. I was born and bred into a post-World War, 1945 culture and apartheid, and I questioned that as an activist. And he became he became the principal of our school and invited me to teach with him. And everyone in that school, when he was there, went 300% beyond their known capabilities just by virtue of his creative presence. And then Doshi. Pancho died in 2015. I met Doshi in 2012. I was invited by Ruturaj Parikh to the 361 conference, and in the bus from the hotel to the venue, there were 2 people who got lost on the bus, and it was myself and Doshi. And at the end of that 20 minutes, my whole life had changed. And suddenly I was teaching with Neelkanth Chai and Shubhra Rajay at Sept, and have never looked back. And my wife and I spent 17 hours on the lawn alone with Doshi over a number of years. So, and he wrote the foreword to my book, and he said, Peter Rich experiences the joy of architecture through his spontaneous sketches and drawings. Influenced by his mentor Pancho Gerish, he uses drawing as an organic expression, seeking to understand the experienced reality through his sketches. A drawing can imbibe impressions and memories. An architect can also draw more precisely to understand scale, proportion, light quality, space, and volume. And Peter explores both of these methods of drawings intuitively. There's a longer forward, but I won't go there. And then lastly, thanks to the presence of two ladies from ID, their Hyderabad branch contacted me, and I'm going to mention that just now, and I sent drawings I'm going to show you, which they requested, to Johanni Palasma very recently. He's just turned 90. Johanni's been writing 10 hours a day, and he's suddenly losing his short-term memory. And he responded, and I'm going to share 3 excerpts from his letter. Now, we know that he wrote The Eyes of the Skin, The Thinking Hand, The Working Hand. In architecture and neuroscience, he proved with a group of Italians that 90 to 95% of what we do is intuitive. And the embodied image, the fact that we embody ourselves. That's the thing with going sketching, that you put your body in the space. It's different to taking a photograph and drawing from it at home. And he said, thank you for your impressive and beautiful drawings. As you know, I have the conviction that the real architectural thinking is only possible through the act of drawing, as the act connects the draftsman's body, memory, imagination, intellect, emotions, perception, as well as knowledge and unconscious memories and meaning. Drawing fuses knowledge with observation, memory, and with fantasy, past and present, as well as a vision with all the other senses, especially touch. Through the art of drawing, one is fully and deeply present in the world. So I share that with you because it's someone who's given his life to trying to articulate these things. And then this is the Triple ID Inscape Golden Jubilee Rainbow Series, which is about roofs. And I was contacted to submit 9 or 10 images to them on the roof. And the first one of them was a compelling sketch-based narrative. I reflected on 10 roof structures across the globe, drawing connection between cultural heritage, material ingenuity, and space. From Macintosh's tartan grid in Glasgow to the sacred geometry of Humpy and the expressive vaults have helped me explore roofs. The insight reveals the roof not just as a shelter. So that's an initiative that Triple ID has taken, and the ladies present tonight are wanting to bring it to Bangalore, or it is in Bangalore. And my 9 sketches, I'm privileged to say, are part of others who've been a co. I was probably the last person in the Macintosh library before the first fire, tragic fire, to do drawings. But what I'm trying to show you here is a lot of my drawing thinking is about analyzing. And walking into Macintosh's library at the Glasgow School of Art is like entering a carefully composed piece of music, each element placed with intention, each silence holding meaning. And you can see there it's a perfect square within this building. And it's a square with 2 squares with a tartan grid in it. And what the tartan grid does is it helps organize space. And these beams that get pulled out are 50 years before Neutra did it in his houses in California, so it's way ahead of its time. And the idea that you can also take bent wood and form it into a plastic element. So sometimes one needs to go back and you need to, in studio, deconstruct what you're learning from. If Glasgow reels light timber and structure breathing life into symmetry, Westridge House, which is my house in Johannesburg, explores how moment makes space come alive. Beneath a pyramidical roof, space shifts and spirals, drawing from Lewis's realm plan and African spatial thinking. I put 2 bits of theory together that were part of my life at that point in time, and it manifests itself in these ways. And these are analytical drawings done for the author of my book, describing what he was actually talking about. And in Rana and China, a roof becomes terrain, an undulating cavity of laminated bamboo that echoes the foothills beyond. I've been speaking to Senthil about Majanath and him and I doing a roof like this because three people, Gaudi, Le Corbusier at Kemsniffer, which is a customs house north of Basel, and Harvey Fagan in Cape Town, have all done buildings which have been inspired by that little school next to Sagrada Familia, tucked away in the one corner, which is a beautiful way of just creating a rhythm. And in Varangal, stone becomes atmosphere. A carved ceiling filters light like leaves through a canopy, and columns rise in silhouette, framing earth and sky. Here, geometry is sacred, not abstract, a quite mathematical of devotion. The roof gathers the shadows, silence, and prayer into a spatial breath. And one nice thing is if you're sketching with a lamy, which is when you fold it, you can either do a sliver or you can do a landscape. And which sliver do you choose that somehow captures the breath of that prayer that's in the space? And further south, among the ruins of Hampi, a modest structure reveals profound meaning, a square within a square, centered around a framed edicule, edicule being the Greek word for a room within a room, speaks of the ancestral and unseen. Short timber bearers radiate outward, echoing the chatra, a geometry, a memory, belief, and metaphysical form held in space. And I'll talk about the chatra as a beautiful idea later on. It's such a beautiful idea of how to house your ancestors. And at Neil Kanshai's retreat near Ahmedabad, a quiet platform rests above a rainwater tank, sheltered by a sloping roof that gathers the monsoon. I will talk about this at length in the body of the lecture. And the same reverence shapes their Mazri Voices for Women Center, where soaring timber vaults rise from the earth, built with minimum means, yet full of presence. The vaults are both protective and expressive, and they give form and resilience to the strength of the voices' long-held silence. That particular space houses 2,000 A4 embroideries with an accompanying text of women across South Africa who've overcome hardship, be it domestic violence or political. On a ridge near Kruger Park, the White Line Interpretation Center stands between sky and memory. Rooted in the Vesica Pisces, its eye to the sky opens the center to the sun, rain, and reflection. Flanking butterfly roofs shroud sacred darkness in light, tuning shadow into evocation, silence into presence. So this is how, and a lot of times I'll be referring to darkness. It's really Doshi who made us aware of where's the darkness within your project. And in a hazy view, Sam and Dina's center is a space for truth-telling and transformation. Earth cement vaults fold gently under a sawtooth roof that channels soft southern light. Inspired by the coral tree's petal, symbol of resistance, the building holds grief and hope in quiet balance, a monument to healing through knowledge. So this is how one transfers those things you've learnt into the buildings you're doing. And lastly, at Ronchamp, Le Corbusier's chapel hovers in contradiction, massive uplifting, dark yet luminous. Its concrete shell floats on a ring of light, transforming roof into metaphor. Here, architecture becomes prayer and structure becomes silence. Here, I'm searching for where to draw and which composition to do, and then I do this one, and the little drawing is probably the most powerful. It's been full, as of August last year, it's been fully restored and is really worth a visit. And Renzo Piano's intervention withdraws quietly to the side and doesn't interfere with the original experience. Travel sketches over a period of nearly 1.5 decades. North of Trivandrum on the way to Aleppi, 2 trees, and I'm new to India, and between these 2 trees, prayers has been had, and I try and draw the thickness of prayer. And I've got an ink pen, okay? Quite overcome by the emotion of the system, of the experience. And then how to, with an ink pen, draw that molten wax that comes from this edifice, and not understanding the symbolism, drawing the vines that come down from that tree together with other artifacts. And then back to Varangal, which we've dealt with, but I'm trying to notice that the ceiling's very important, and trying to unpack the geometry that is behind the idea, and also how, in the particular faith, elements of nature are brought into it, and what is the underlying order. So it's always a quest for searching for that. and then a quick drawing, and this raises the question of when is a drawing finished? You do this quickly because you're being called to the bus, and you think you'll do it later on. You might not, but a lot's got to do with the moment. And recently, just yesterday, we were exploring the temples around Hassan, which get into star shape, and this idea of the plinth, which is very regularly here. So to choose just that piece of plinth, and then this piece, which starts to expose the fact that, these buildings dealt with seismic forces, which didn't just occur in our time, through the way they were prefabricated. And then these three drawings, which are really trying to come to terms with the sacredness of that entrance threshold from one source of light, with one light just hovering, and how you really just have the presence of something very sacred in that half light and darkness. And how to frame a view. Walk around, choose the view. One knows about foreground, middle ground, background, and there's this one, and then there's this one, and when is a drawing finished? Does it need to be finished? Maybe it's enough. What are you trying to say? Who are you communicating with? You're communicating with yourself, and you're trying to actually capture the essence of that experience and time. And here's a pavilion within a space that's like an edicule in itself, a Trishi, and it's just so powerful. And the little scribbles have got to do with reminding me that if I do want to render it on the aeroplane, I've got some idea of what to do. And then learning about axiality, learning about, the lingam, 2/3 of it is under the ground, and the base of this is actually something that's a flower. And then going to Kumbatua and climbing up at the top of the hill, and you get this lion which captivates you with another lion, and then you realize that they're actually in line with one another, okay, and very, very powerful. And then you look what they lead to, and you do the plan. They actually lead to this, which is probably your national bird. And then I really felt it was necessary to draw the background texture, which handled light in a certain way, which was coming from just one source. And then you notice there was another axis in another direction. So one's looking for the order, because a lot of architecture is about order and knowing when to break the order as a fundamental. We've been teaching students that. And then I had the chance to go on a walk with the retired head of the Indian Army in Kuti and to the Toda people, and we walked about 11 kilometers. And this drawing's done when I got back home, because we're part of a cattle culture. These are not cattle, they buffalo, and they're sacred. So I was interested in the ritual of the buyer, okay? And there were symbols of the moon, there were symbols of something else. And while I was there, this is all I could draw before the rain came. So it was my only drawn memory of what I'd seen other than photographs. So I went back home and finished it, and then turned it into a narrative. We've got illustrators in the audience, so this becomes an illustration. I drew what I thought the cattle were, I drew the place of the priest at the back, and then I took the symbolism of the particular animal and the sun and the moon, and tried to unpack it as part of a storyboard. And then from the back of it, the rain was pouring down. How did I capture that particular experience on the 15th of the 10th, 2023? And then this is interesting, because I went to the Temple of the Sea south of Chennai, and was met with this hostility from a security guard who said you weren't allowed to draw. So I was with students who cornered him and threatened to make things go viral. And while I did that, I ran and I did a quick drawing, and then he chased me, and then I did another drawing, and then he chased me, and I did it. And what I did is I really captured the softness of the weatheredness of the ocean on these particular things. They're one of my favorite drawings. But we found out how to do with that. It's just disempowered people who misinterpret the rules, which you can get on your phone now, which are that you're not allowed to photograph. Professional photographers have to have a tripod, and if you come with tapes to measure up as an archaeologist would, it's not allowed, and they misinterpret that as sketching. So we've learned how to deal with that one. And then we go back into the darkness. And, this could be IIM Bangalore, The spaces are all there. The drama's all there. The articulation's there. The system of rhythm is there. The relationship of a ritual being happened across space and the order. And in this particular place, I went in. We had permission to go in, but I didn't know you couldn't draw, and I was stopped drawing at a certain point, and so one should have been, because it was a pilgrim route going in. And then we went out, and we went up the cobbled steps, up to the top, and then drew this landscape. I mean, just the way the decisions made by humankind to meet the water and to venerate and celebrate certain things that have happened is quite profound. And then one starts looking at the business of entry and how elements of nature, I'll be dealing with animist culture later on in Africa, how animist culture comes in, the reverence for nature because you're at one with nature. It's not the Christian construct that you're above nature. So that intrigued me. And then always drawing the plan, because the plan tells you so much, okay? But that layering, the way it actually greets you, and the gesture, the double gesture of entry. And then this is a kund, and it's enough. It's a quick drawing done. It could be colored in, could be made, but that'd be another drawing. So when to stop? And then Lijoy, Remy, when I visited them way back in 16, they sent me to this man who was over 100, who had started a university, and he sent me to the top of a hill, so I drew his space. And then this is on the way to just outside Bangalore, a view to the top of the hill. Quick drawings. They're quick drawings, really. You don't have time. And then a frame view. And this needs work done to it. I'm quite sure if I put the water in and I put the reflections in, it'll be a more powerful drawing. But I was hoping to go there this time or another time to redraw it anyway. And then Cookie took me to the temple complex out near the airport. And I found just that moment where just the beauty of this idea that you have a square column and you can just chamfer the sides of it. And through chamfering the sides of it, you can actually, just there and there, you can set up this rhythm. And then the relationship of the temple itself and the colonnade. And then up at Tungi, with the Maliks, took me down to see this temple, which only appears when the monsoon subsides, because it's submerged, with guano all over it. And somehow these pieces of the temple had fallen away like pieces of a chessboard. But it was the most highly evocative, beautiful thing, and it dealt with that idea of darkness. And then this composition takes the axial arrangement and then the pieces that have actually gone off. But it was mythological in its presence and life. And then going to the Ellora Caves, where I was with Solana Bernates, and I blindfolded him. He didn't know where he was going, and he couldn't believe the caves when I took his blindfold off. And I'm interested in this idea of implied diagonal. So here you've got a kund, and you draw the plan, you draw the implied diagonal, and then you accompany that to the section. You've got the plan, and up there you take this view, you take this view. Which view do you actually take? And then you draw the section, and it all just comes together very, very quickly with these outlying pavilions. And then how do you capture the essence of that experience at Ellora Caves with a sliver of your book? You know, you draw one sliver, you draw another sliver, you put a bit of foreground in this incredibly deconstructed elephant. And you've got the presence of this other mass that's being carved, so you need to do the base of that. Amazing experiment. And on the sketch group we're on, it's interesting people's different interpretations of these caves. And then I was taken by leisure in Trisha to, I didn't know that your culture, but you're much older than Europe is. In Europe I visited these menhirs and that in Scotland and in Ireland and places, but there they were in the landscape. And another touchback to the ancient, before I got to realize the 8,000-year history of your people. And this is the drawing I wanted to show you of the chatra, because we had permission from royalty to go into this particular sacred graveyard. But just this idea, I did this drawing just before I came the other day, of putting an architectural base, having 4 columns or 8 columns or whatever, depending on your thing. And the idea of umbrella, I believe this means umbrella. And then you bring your prospective bride and you bring your new baby to talk to your ancestors, who are held in that space between. Such an incredibly beautiful idea. What a beautiful way to just go and visit your ancestors when they're just held in space. And again, what keeps happening is this reference to nature. And then at Golconda, this unbelievable, visceral, raw landscape, which wrestles with one another, with the walls of man over time, on other rocks and things. And distortions that actually happen in that particular context. And then the place of imprisonment of the poet, and the fact there was a mezzanine level, and just the borrowed light on these ribs, which you see in the Queen's Place in Humpy and various places. What a beautiful way to he didn't want to give up being imprisoned because he actually loved it here. Just let me go back. And it's a space that needed drawing more than once. It needed to draw this, it needed to... And you become aware of shadows, you become aware of rhythm, you become aware of proportion. So every time you do this, it's like a reminder to the basic fundamentals that are architecture. And then you add to that darkness and shadow. And again, another, you're just spellbound. You've dreamt of going here, and you're suddenly here. What to draw? This is one of my favorites. It's a quick drawing. You're just looking up, there's some pilgrims going past, so you do a drawing. And then you do something with the sky, and it's done. It's enough. But this one needed a bit more rendering to just give it a little bit of foreground and a bit of depth. And then the love affair with Mandu. We've got Bharath Ramrutharam as a photographer sitting in front, and he's been photographing it, and we've been talking about, he asked me if my drawings could become part of a book. So what we've been doing is we've been provoking one another to go back and go back. And it's a love affair I've had because that place it takes you into a fantasy way of the difference between the feminine and the masculine. Again, this is a narrative drawing. These are drawings done in situ. There I'm trying to draw the narrative of the concubines and the perfume pool. And is it the yin-yang, whatever it is, what is the nature of that brings the perfume or the water into the pool, contrasted with the very masculine Afghani and other things in its stripped-down form. And then the feminine windows, almond-shaped, opposite one another at corners, okay, sloping as flowers, the most beautiful, beautiful way of celebrating a feminine principle in architectural terms. And then you take a walk around and you get to the other side and the roof's off, and again it's rhythm, it's proportion. And then the idea of shadow, okay? And the composition of that shot for the shadow. And it doesn't matter if the monsoons haven't filled the lake, because as an artist you can fill it with water anyway. And so there's just been, the missing pieces need to come in to these drawings, and you start talking about, is this for elephants to go into the water? Is it for concubines to go and get on boats and go for a ride? But whatever it is, it's highly evocative, and it's beautifully choreographed, okay? And you do find the possibility of routes that take elephants to the back. And like most ruins, it actually inspires you to actually think about those things. And then another 2 reconstructed drawings. Just this simple move, which is handled twice, had to phone Jai Krishnan and his wife Krishna Chitra in Trivandrum to find out if Indians had mermaids, and because I wanted to put a mermaid's tail in there. It just seemed to be right. And then you'll see when I show you the Dogon, this idea of perfume, the fetus, the moon, the sort of feminine things that link. I was tempted to make snakes' heads at the end of these tresses, but that would have been a little bit too provocative. And then the lap pools for the Olympic swimmers, okay, which we actually saw up at Hassan this weekend as well. And then the beautiful idea of the lotus, and I'm dealing with the lotus in India and in China, so they're two things to celebrate. And how can you celebrate it? In China, we've been asked to do a spa where you get massaged inside a lotus leaf. We're just lucky to have a client that is as crazy as I am. And the nice thing about turning your lemmy sideways and just folding it out is you can extend your vision. You can look down, you can look at the construction, you can look at that, you can look at that. But it has to do with composition. And, you know, composition is amazing. I've just been in Cookie's house, and I've just been with the camera just looking at how things are being composed. Things float, things hang, things are in sync in a sort of Hindu Zen way. And then my favorite, the two bars, the one kund of light, and that's drawn from those steps over there, and this is drawn from there to here. And now I'm compelled, I've got to go and draw the section through there that looks that way. That's my first task when I get home, and I know it well enough to draw it. And then the Kund of Darkness, which if you take the section through it, which is incredibly drawn by Nirav Hepara in Vodadara with the students, it's almost like a Ladoo, you know, long before Ladoo. And you can only take water out from the top, and there's a secret door that goes around the side. Absolutely the most beautiful idea in contrast to the other. And then the idea of silhouette and the idea of water before mausoleum. And I was intrigued that there seemed to be an asymmetry here, so I drew that asymmetry. This is reconstructed in studio. It's a little bit stiff. It hasn't got the freedom of the other drawings, but I mean, it's me on a learning curve. And when I was there with Atulu's in the audience, with his dad, I had my Lemmy phone up, my iPhone up there, and I left it. It was bright green, apple green. I left it at 6 in the morning to go down and write the proper name of this. And when I came back, it was gone. And I know it was the monkeys, but the monkeys, I haven't had a call from them. And I went to the police station, and there were these neat policemen with their ironed shirts. You know, everything's ironed, and they don't have big stomachs. And they apologized. They said the only criminal offense we have here or disruption is teenage boys looking at someone else's girlfriend. But we'll go and speak to the tribals. And then I was giving a triple ID lecture in the open air and indoor 2 days later, and they stopped the lecture, and the commandant of police arrived with the policeman, and they gave me a new iPhone 13 to say they're sorry. Paradox of India. Okay. And this is a wonderful palace. It's at the base of a hill, and you've got Ramputis right at the top, which is done historically for his lover who died. But it's an incredible. I've had talks with K. Dungawala. I've seen drawings that architect Rajay did of this particular thing. And what happens is you enter it, and when you enter this last courtyard, it's amazing because you've got a smaller courtyard going into a bigger courtyard. You've got an axial relationship with a narrow thing that brings you into here. Then you've got a square with an implied diagonal there, and then you've got it opening up. So there are just 2 or 3 architectural moves that are completely understood. And also you enter it in a very Lachanesque type way. And then I did this drawing recently for a discussion with Bharat because there it is down at the bottom. You go past the lake, then you come up and you do this and you go in, and here's that dream of his lover looking towards the Arabian Sea or over the water, but the topography is actually what causes the drama. And then I tried to redraw the plans. And if you draw the plans, they're very sort of Lutschanesque in a way, although they came before Lutsch. And I think you sort of enter here like that. So it's very contemporary, the way the way we perceive contemporary architecture to work. And when you go up there and you approach it at this particular, these are the horse stables, and then you go around and you've got this change of elevation where you get lifted from the darkness of the walkway into the top thing. And then when you get on top, this is the dream that he did, which was the dream for his lover to actually look at the view she wanted. And it's actually about this base, and it's about that. I drew that standing in the middle, trying to see if I could draw the space around you. And then I had to realize that my eye level had to actually come outside it. So that's a reconstruction at the top. Then Badami. One drawing, and then just by shifting your perspective, you've got some foreground. It's a better drawing. And then this was done with J. Krishnan, and here's his JK. His son's in the audience, and we were befriended by this family who the Tulsi plant told us they were Hindu. And then J. Krishnan went and measured the piece of environment we were in. I think it's one of the strengths of your teaching in your schools, that you, especially at the Vadia school, that you go to living cultures and document them, because you do urban design not at the end of your course. You do it right at the beginning. You realize cultural complexity. You realize space making. You realize it's about the street. You realize it's the lessons that Bijou and other people try and teach you. And so we, these are drawings that are documentation. And they have to do with Granny's place, with the cattle, with the bedroom, with the kitchen, and then occupied by the elder children, who actually turn it into something that respects her particular origins, and yet they manage to put the new within the old. And these are some of the nice project schools of architecture are doing, where how do you intervene in that historical context? And then these changes of level, very important. And in India, you're very gifted with this. We won a competition working with Field and Clegg and Bradley in London on a new green city. And we were trying to explain to the Britishers that if you're building on an upslope, the Indians have got the answer. You just got to go here, and you just got to go and look at the Kannada brothers' house, where you put the staircase next to the party wall, and you can actually, through half levels, end up, instead of a 3.5 meter retaining wall at the back, you can end up with 1 meter. Those are the lessons. And then contemporary Indian architecture. Post the passing of the Sarabhais, the caretaker makes you quite aware that you've got, the better part of 15 minutes. So again, these are quick drawings, and he looks for you, and you move around around. It becomes like a Charlie Chaplin thing. He can't find you. It's hilarious. And you draw the one drawing that way, and you draw the other drawing that way, and then you're relieved you got the interior space, but you're going to go back. And there is an advantage in the quick drawing, because it just forces your hand, because you don't know in your life when you're going to have the chance to actually be in that moment ever again. And then this is when I got to the mill owners, and finally I could reconcile that. I could actually try and draw two light sources from different ends. The grid, the plastic space, the incredible proportion system. And if you start actually measuring it, it's just sublime how it works. I don't know what happened there. Need a bit of help. Okay, thank you. And that staircase, the way it detaches just from the end, it needs a drawing on its own, but you're trying to get that unbelievable spatial interplay. And the darkness is there, but there's light from two sources. And then the magic of this space. And I embedded in it the plan, and the fact that you pause at this point to see if the lecturer's who's there and you can leave. They're nice little human qualities. And just the fact that he's taken plywood and he's spun it at an angle, it actually creates a whirl around the space. So materially, it's actually very, very potent. And then the section. Okay, there's someone looking through. They can leave. And then what I did is I decided to just when I was preparing this lecture to come here, to just reconstruct that. And one wonders if that's not where the House Elfric of Caen got that particular shape. That's how it works. We see things and we make them our own. And then the hand he gave you, and it's controversy. And when you attempt to draw it, the quick drawing has its own power. The reconstructed drawing gets a little bit stiff, and you're critical of yourself. That's what you should be. When do you become self-conscious? When don't you become self-conscious? You enter into the darkness of the governor's lobby. Abalamba's got you in there as construction workers, so you're really gifted, because I believe you can't normally get in there. And you experience the darkness in its true sense. And then the rough drawings. And I really love these. They just capture the moment in a different way. So I'll go through them just slowly. Crude, not to scale, bit distorted, with the distortions delicious. And then the quintessential drawing you spend a bit of time with. Taking students, except just sketching a journey. You walk in, you turn, you look at the building, you start drawing what is the ordered grid? You have a discussion. Is it the Sarabai house that actually influenced the thinking behind it? Did he work on the Sarabai house? Didn't he work on the Sarabai house? Where those crits take place? How does the mound relate to the thing? You're trying to understand the geography of the building, and drawing it's a nice way to do it. And then you turn the corner and you get these views going across and the view going up, okay? And somehow there's something right about it. It has not a Pyrenean scale, it has a Korb scale. It has actually a very human scale to it. And then trying to actually understand that further, and the language, and what is the music score being played. And then Khan must have been absolutely very jealous of this entranceway. It's just so gorgeous. But these need more darkness in it, because that darkness all happens around the staircases. And they're just a complete and absolute delight. This has started to have the darkness. But you can spend a week there drawing these stairs. And this speaks for itself. That's the drawing you do on site. Then you do a bit of coloring in on the scratching on the aeroplane. And then these are just, you can imagine, the way Doshi used to glide. He's talking to you about the garden here. And he had this special relationship with the gardener. He was drunk the one time I was there, the gardener, not Doshi. And he said, no, let him be, he's fine. And I think he passed around the time of Doshi, and the garden just started to cry for him, okay? And he just talks to you about the love of the decisions that were actually made here, and then that intimacy when you go down into the space, and his office is around the corner. How do you capture those moments of intimacy? And this is where he meets you and talks. I was last there with Sumitro presenting his work. That's the last time we were together. And then Chaya, one's other guru. He just says it's very simple. It's a series of thresholds. Subliminal changes, okay? I'm talking with Cookie to students today from Vadia about that. And there's an element that starts repeating itself, okay? And we're there a very short while. I don't have a plan, but he says there, it's a few repetitive elements that I actually play with, but you suddenly realize there's something very special going on. And then you visit his retreat at Alu, just outside Ahmedabad, with him, and you arrive and there's this wall, and there's a hole in the wall, and the building just disappears. And here he is meeting his staff, okay? A wall hides the horizontal from you, informality and raised shrubbery court. There's a sort of informality, and then where the two systems meet, let me go back. There's the crudeness of this concrete that comes here, and there's an expansion joint where the wall comes around, and then the top of the stairs, and then this rough cast wall, and then this very flimsy, homemade sort of edge which keeps the monsoon rains off. And you turn down and you go down, okay, into a sliver of space, and then you turn. And, it's a sunken courtyard and a lobby. You pause, there's a change of direction. You transcend, there's gravitas, there's lightness. And then you learn that you're actually seated on what is a big water tank, and this inclined roof actually is where the rain goes in. So it's inclined water tank from which you observe nature. And you do a quick drawing on that visit. And he explains to you that this was going to be a meditation room that was separate from this. And he said, we don't actually need it because we can sit here and meditate. And what he does when he sits there is you floating. It's inviting dappled light and darkness, a communicating contemplation with nature, reflection, in tiles edging as part of contemplation, and their happy accidents. He was thrilled when I did this drawing, and then I did this drawing, and I showed how the piece of marble here started to reflect the tree, and he just loves that. And look at the minimal, the minimal staircase. Britishers and Australians and Canadians don't need to come here because it doesn't comply with health and safety regulations. And what he does is you just sit and he establishes his own horizon. He doesn't look at the river because your own horizon is in your contemplation of what you're doing. And there's this darkness. The guest room is down below. Then I went back more recently because I wanted to see the internal space where he makes the food. And I started realizing there's this chair that's speaks for itself in plan section, and the architecture's about that. It's got that sort of homemade quality you get in the Rietveld house, which is absolutely beautiful. And that's the niche where you sit. And there's the tree at the end. And if any of you have seen the newly released Sketching Chai 65-minute documentary, brilliantly filmed, Chai's seated, and coincidentally there's a tree coming out the top of his head. It's a beautiful opening sequence. And that's coming up from the guest bedroom. And then I mentioned to Kay Dungawala that in every school of architecture, there are practitioners who don't write refereed articles. They don't have PhDs or masters, but they're actually the pulse of the school. And Lou Pereira and Kiran Pandey, they were there there was Varki, who was a major figure. They were there. I wanted to meet them because Sudha Reddy said when he interned there, it changed his life. And I spoke to so many students who just said, that's where we really learnt. And then you start realizing the idea of borrowed light. It's in Doshi's house, it's in Hushmak Patel's house, it's in this house. And when you visit the house and you start seeing the details and you start seeing the low window onto the garden and how cross-ventilation works, these are the unsung. And I'm pleased to say that finally there are books on their work. And then Kiran Pandey, You know, I loved when you go to Cookie's office and you've got that beautiful light washing the wall. He had a similar idea at a point in time. And then we crossed to Africa and a cattle culture. Now, these are illustrations. Okay, I'm drawing the difference, why we draw. The Egyptians believed that the north-south lie of the Nile River and the Milky Way established a Nile meridian. If you take it in that direction through the Giza pyramids, it's the longest earth covered and the longest earth covering the other way. It happens to finish in Gandhi's ashram in Durban, okay? And south of the Sahara, we have a cattle culture where it's wives for cattle. That's when you get betrothed. It's how many wives. There's so many at the engagement, so many at the wedding. And this is how Africans used to live. And they lived in a very beautiful way and always talk about the sense of belonging they have when they lived there. The cattle were at the center. The entrance to the cattle was opposite the chief, furthest from the entrance. When you were at war, it was enclosed. When you weren't at war, it was something else. And it goes back thousands of years. And each one is a family culture. And I went and measured this up. What I do is I go with a measuring tape. I don't go as the architect or as the academic. I go as a normal mortal, and I meet the mothers and the grandmothers and the children, and I measure up a whole settlement, including with triangulation. I just love doing that because that's part of the immersion. And you really learn about the people, okay? And you learn incrementally that, this is the sacred form with sleeping and storage, and the outdoor room is there, and the square form is when you acquire Western ways with furniture. And then I started to articulate that. This is a young girl at a coming out ceremony. She goes through a ritual where she has to present herself like a chrysalis, going into a butterfly as this evolved human being who's now the carrier of life. And through adorning her body, she experiences axiality, symmetry, duality, frontal informed by the human body, and she learns the same. So I learned from these illiterate women about architecture the same lessons you can learn going to Rome, and how they practice it through incremental growth. And this is what I call an allegorical drawing. It's the planners in my mind, the women do the architecture. She's part of a cattle culture. She has a defensible space because there's snakes and wild animals out there, and you define your piece of the universe. Her sister-in-law's present at the wedding with a snake, which is beadwork that rustles because it's a fertility symbol. The fertility doll and the woman become one, and it's a play between phallic symbolism and fertility doll. And she's sitting on the sacred ensamo of her ancestors, under which is the place to the crocodile, which is the place to the water. So it's in one drawing trying to mythologically pull that all together. So it's my dream state of putting it down. And these are the paintings that need to now be done. And then when you go to a homestead, that's documentation. This is analysis. There's an arrival. The male guards the cattle, and he guards the entrance. He's the carrier of the seed. He has to defer to go into the womb of the woman. 2 wives, okay? They reach complete consensus over gable ends, hipped ends. Firstborn son given a prominent position of the firstborn wife. They've got married quarters over here. The circle is a daughter who showed divine qualities and became a Sangoma. So when you walk into these settlements, it's absolutely the social experiment, and the role of men and women in a non-hierarchical way is incredibly clear. That's what it was like until the overlords of apartheid came, and the British. The first thing you do is you smash social structure, and then you put another religious belief in the way. And we're dealing with the outcomes of that now. And then we go to, much like your culture, spiritual connection with nature, integration and interconnectedness. Jan Christian Smuts, South African, 1928, theory of holism. the father of the whole of the ecological culture, and also how many, there must be hundreds of Nobel Prize winners. He also wrote, as an Afrikaner, wrote the League of Nations, which became the United Nations, and he was the one person, Winston Churchill said, while the NATO forces were at war in the Second World War, there's only one man he'd hand over to, and that was his former enemy. And he's also someone, although who Cambridge said there were three great men. There was Newton, there was Milton, and there was Jan Christian Smuts. So we have these amazing people. And here's Johanni, the rest of his letter, prompted by Triple ID. From the moment of having seen you with one of your drawings, my first visit to South Africa, I've admired your drawings, and I've deeply regretted that I could not accompany you and your other good friends on your joy to Bung. It was Marlon Blackwell who was here, it was Rick Joy, it was Wendell Burnett, it was that we took on a tour of Bandigara in 2008, and I'm having an exhibition curated by my son and I in America at 3 venues next year. I could make only 3 quick drawings of the Bandigara Canyon and the Dogon villages because the sun was unbearably hot, and although I've entered the canyon at last sunrise, I sent one of my sketches and a letter of birthday gift to John Utzon in 2008, just before his passing away in November of that year. So here I am, I'm on my own in 1997, having given money to someone to go 800 kilometers, Dudley away, for me to meet with them and travel 127 kilometers of the cliff faces of the Dogon face the desert, in a culture I don't know, and I don't speak French, and I've got the Marcel Griol, the great anthropologist. I'm trying to unpack what he's talking about. The winning basket has got 7 heavenly bodies in it, and it all has to do with grain, and this is the female grain, and the male grain is something else, and this is wild animals, vegetables, and insects, and you've got men and fish, and you've got the actual tread is female and the riser is male. So suddenly you're in a culture where the reference points are very different to our own in a Christian Judaic world. And what does it mean? And how does that, when you read a settlement, this is an animist doctor, what is the structuring and order of these things? Where are the children, where are the parents, where are the grandparents, where's female stuff done, where's male stuff done? Okay? And then the woman is supposed to hold up the sky, and there's something about the sun and the womb and the fetus and the perfume. The drawings are quite crude, but I'm trying to actually understand what he's talking about. And my medium is drawing, it's not words. Okay, so I'm trying to unpack the words and claim for nature a piece of heaven on earth. And there you've got the river, you've got the escarpment, you've got the cliff faces where they get buried, and then the vultures take their hearts to heaven. You've got them living on the screen, you've got the desert. And each one of these has a different climatic condition. Long before the word sustainability, just done. I was also placed in a very beautiful space. First year architecture 64, meeting Pancho, making me aware of Africa. The Architecture Without Architects exhibition happening at MoMA at the same time. And Alder van Eck writing in 1961 and 1967 about the Dogon. He wrote about the anthropomorphism, the head, the body. A lot of the more cosmic things he went in and acted out in his children's playgrounds. Okay? The Taguna, the public space where you meet, a different medium of drawing. Okay, a rough pen, very different to the ink drawing. And the Taguna you have to sit in. It'd be quite good to have Trump there. You couldn't stand up and yell at people. You've got to actually bang your head. You have to keep calm. So there's again another thing. The public space is differently structured. And also, I don't think it's just the sculptors, the Henry Moores and the Picassos, who changed the way they perceived the human form through the abstraction they saw in Africa. I think there were also, Siam was at the time, They were also seeing these cities that were cities in one material, and they were built with one module that was repeated, and there was a cohesiveness. And I own this sculpture now, and I'm just looking at the proportioning system that makes the decisions of how you elongate that and how the seated position does it. And then the sacred landscape. You talk to the landscape. The landscape is a being. The landscape, the plants, the trees, they can actually affect your human life because they have spirits of their own. They're animated. And it's very different to ours. The snake has a connotation. You don't go in there. They're places of worship. They're places of where menstruating women congregate, so you have to go with a guide and you have to deal with deference. And you're in this desert, there's a sandstorm, and you've got people that live on the fringes like that. And then these are my son Robert's drawings. You try and reconstruct what are you actually looking at, and what's it in plan, okay? And a tree, an anthill, they become a living entity. And you can talk to the mountain, okay? You can actually feel it. I put this in here for Bharat and Bijoy because we went within 500 meters of this 6 weeks ago. And I told you I did a drawing. It's not of the Dogon, but this is that drawing of that particular landscape. And the landscape, it happens with the Aborigines in Australia. You actually go and you talk to a piece of mountain because it's a being. And in river dwelling, there's Wendell Burnett, there's Marlon, and there's Tom Kundig. Okay? And you're on the horizontal. So we're trying to do this in our exhibition. How do we deal with that horizontality as opposed to the cliff face when you enter into space? How do you deal with tightness? And you've got literally a few seconds to draw this because they're yelling to get on the bus. But you actually come, and those of you know who Henry Comrie is, an urban designer, he said this to him talks about what we're doing, about private space, about physical privacy by change of level. You find it all in these villages. And who said we should look at the villages? Doshi, Charles Correa, and we concur. And I'm doing a book called Placemaking in Africa, and then with Nandan Balsabha talking about placemaking in India, and we're finding this common ground. And then city dwelling. That man standing over here, it takes you a second to draw that. You understand the plan. This has got an entrance here, and who's sitting over here is the mayor of Mopti. You're waiting for a school of architecture to arrive from Paris so you can measure up part of a city. I didn't include those drawings here. And here, the buttress, these are toilets. So you go to first floor level, you shower and you urinate in this space, and there's another one where you defecate, and that stacks up. It's like a long drop above ground, and when the floods come, you kick it open, and that all gets scraped out and goes to is in irrigation channels to where the food is made. So I've got homage to Tony Garnier and Le Corbusier. There's this idea of the vision of the city, especially at that time in the 60s, post-World War, when we were having these universal constructs. And there were these more human examples living. And then a mosque. And I draw it as this. I draw it in its context. I draw it, it's quite interesting because most of them are like, this one is like a mound of sand that you go into and you're not too sure where the access is. And then Robert, my son, draws the context. So there's a give and take between the two. And he notices what the use is, okay? What's happening over here where the toilet is there, there's a possible upper door over there. You're busy thinking. You're a thinking architect and you use drawings. And this takes you no time to do. You pace out, that's 5 meters by 5 meters, this is 8 meters by 8 meters, that's the elevation, that's that. We were trying to tell students from Vadia today that you can do this in a tick, okay? And then there's a darkness inside, there's a shade structure outside, and you know the knowledge. And if you've got more time, you can do this, where you can actually look at the rhythm, be more careful about it, have a look what the music score is, and then have a look at how the transition is from the one thing to the other. And then we go to Venice, in conclusion. 2018, Grafton Architects, Yvonne Farrell and Shelley McNamara, curators of the theme Free Space. And they said, Peter, the visceral nature of your drawings becomes your architecture. We've chosen you as one of 71 people to exhibit in our curator's choice out of 280 people. And we've chosen you because of your drawings, and we want your exhibition to be about your drawings. And then I was arriving at Hong Kong airport coming out of mainland China with my son. There's no WhatsApp or Google there, as you know. And our phones went ping, ping. And lo and behold, it was Yvonne. And the next day, we had to submit what is the construct of your work. Now, construct is important. It's grabbing you by the scruff of your neck and saying, what do you stand for? What is the essence of what your practice and your work is about? And we're trying to get architects to, number one, have an exhibition and then do a book. They're very different, because a book has, an exhibition has a lot of stuff that you weed out. You start picking up themes, and then what you do is when you do a book, you've got 9 to 18 projects, and that's it. So you have to get to the essence. So we phoned my son in South Africa, and he said, Dad, one body of your work is axiality, symmetry, duality, frontality, informed by the human body. You coined the word, a house is not a home unless it's a village. It has to do with incremental growth. It has to do with the underbelly. It has to do with how you learnt that in your design of a house. And it has to do with liminal space and transitions. And the other one is about informed by nature's order, which is this work. And they said, we want this one. So that was the first part of a discussion. But just like Bijoy is engaging in intellectual discourse with Zumthor and people, they engage very intelligently with you. And they say, we haven't given you a site. And by the way, it's this drawing that you showed in Dublin, where you actually found almost the fish as a fossil, and the visceral nature of your work is why we've chosen you. But we want your drawings to be 2.7 by 1.5. And there's going to be an exhibition of, the actual exhibition is going to be at the Ice Factory in April. So we're coming down Africa, and I'm doing drawings, and I'm going completely off on the wrong tack. I'm trying to do a curved, carved building, which we then submitted to the team in Dublin, and they said, no. You've got to go back to the anthropological. Drawings are best when they're straight. Create a low space and a high space, and you can create all that drama. And so they said, we're giving you the space, which is in the arsenal. It's 7 by 7 by 7. And you can have a north or south-facing window. Took a north-facing window. And this window, which is 3.8, try and use the borrowed light with that so you can use as little artificial lighting as possible. And also, I want you to respect the damage that's been done by 20 different exhibitions, which are like trade fairs. They just trash the place. They block the views to the... We want to heal the whole of the... So there was a healing mission. And it was beautifully done. So that's the space they gave you. And we built a model, and then I think this is the only slide I've got. It just hangs. We took it on an aeroplane. We made a model. We looked at how Italians design beautifully. They separate things. And we put lights in here that we never used. And then my son said to me, Dad, why don't you take a lot of your projects and hang them at 45 degrees so that the light can come through? And then Grafton said, hooray, the Chinese have been asking for a double story here. Their double story can work for you. It works for them. So what I'm trying to say is they weren't just curators. There was this, and then there was absolute reverence. They said over here, your name is going to go over here. We're going to dictate the typeface, and you can have 2 sentences. One sentence there and another sentence there, and we'll control the typeface. It's none of this thing. It's not about ego. It's about work as an art. And when you draw, you can go to places you've never been, was the one quotation. And then the front picture was a 2,000-year-old settlement of a shaman that is important in my life, and he overlaid it with a Christian construct of beginning and end, Golgotha, the the altars where the altar of God was interesting, the altar of women, the altar of Christ was the altar of men. He had Christ's office. It had up and down. It had all the opposites that occur within that liturgy. And then these are drawings of China. It's the only non-African scheme we had. And I found when I went to China, I started drawing in a Chinese way because the sensibility demands it of you. It smells different. The language is different. The paintings are different. You suddenly understand that. And then this drawing, this has all been built because we've got this guy who thinks Buddha sent me to him. And we communicate on WeChat. And then you can't exactly kick the arse of an owner-builder client, so I made him a pupil, and I can fail him if he doesn't perform properly. It works beautifully. Okay? And then this is Mapungubwe. I redrew a lot of these, and some of the schemes that are not redrawn, that weren't built, have started to have babies, because if you enter into the dream state that drawing takes you, you can actually manifest things. You know, it's a sort of like, yeah. And we had drawings one above one another, so how do you do it? We were communicating other things in northern Tigray, where Coptics take their babies up cliff faces to get to spaces. It was interesting to take Billy Singh and Todd Williams up there, because you had to explain to Americans that they had to have their backsides supported if they wanted to live. And this is Westridge House, which is my own house, which was this form construct facing the wrong way, because the British said you had to face the street, whereas the sun's there. And I went and built a cottage there and that there, defined a forecourt, defined a side court, defined that main court. It's due north, so the equinox comes through here. And I've started to build a village. I'll talk about that later. And these are the two drawings I showed in Dublin, which is the First Nation people building on a quarry in A-grade fynbos, which has got the highest molecular structure of any plant in the world, at the site where Attenborough, together with the Frenchman, what's his name, Cousteau's son, photographed one of the wonders of the world, which is the sardine run, and also near the oldest piece of art ever found, which is a piece of stone that's actually got different directions carved on it. So we were giving these First Nation people custodianship over a conservancy. That's Plettenberg Bay there, and we've got a holiday house right in the far distance over there. And these were drawings of a seagull flying at 32 meters. We were dealing with a typology that was really a can with tentacles, because it also had a whole thing about the sea. And there's a certain group of people, evidence here that they survived the Iron Age, and it's the reason why we're here. There are many theories in archaeological circles. But put all of these narratives together. And then this is the Voices for Women Center, okay, composed with bits and pieces. And, you know, we had to take certain drawings and using Photoshop and that, put them in, okay? But the bigger drawings were done as originals, and they're busy being archived at the moment. And then these are the rough works. This is the archive that happens below when the ramp comes down, and you're looking at the egg, you're looking at metaphors for what is the feminine, you're working with Zulus, you're working with Indians, you're working with people of all different backgrounds. And then you make these dance with one another, okay? They're schemes that you had that did or didn't materialize, all in Africa, okay? And you revisit them. And some of these schemes are from those experiments with spas in China, getting massaged inside a thing, and then I draw as part of a search to find my way. And then just in conclusion, the allegorical drawings, a story with a symbolic and hidden meaning. This one we've done. This one is my nose and my eye, and I'm born on the 20th of March, and my wife's nose and I, we've been together 61 years, and Jackson's fish, so we're at either ends of the Piscean stage, and this is Jackson the sculptor with God holding the world. There's the angel Gabriel. They sit at my front door next to Vishnu floating on a leaf, sucking his toe. And then here's the hand that gives, the hand that receives. There's Ra, the sun god, ancient Egyptian religion, 25th of December, the resurrection, it's all there. We won the thematic master plan in Axum, the oldest city south of the Sahara, with the Queen of Sheba, the Coptics, the Jews. And it was very, very interesting learning curve of how the Egyptian, and actually the African sculptor Jackson goes right back to the Egyptians, because a lot of Christian liturgy is embedded in that, and there's a borrowing and stealing that happens. And there's a huge amount of text left out of certainly the James Bible. And there's the mountains you can see from the top of my hill, which are 1,000 times older than the Himalayas. And here's the Chinese bowl, which has daisies floating in it, which celebrates our wedding anniversary in 71. And then this is the drawing looking the other way. I'm up the site. I'm looking at the house, this cleavage of roofs. This is an Indian basin. This is the house. This is the house I was born in, double-storied, implied diagonal. There's the house we lived in with my wife's grandmother. And this is symbolic of the 5 women, 2 grannies, 2 mothers of my wife that have played in my life, and the gasworks and the mining land. So these are done for you. They're not just family trees, they're mythological trees. And then the last part of the letter from Palaz, my friend, please prepare a comprehensive thematized book of your drawings. The students around the world who are uncritically made to believe in the virtues of computer design and the horrifying perspectives of AI surely need this. So that's Yohani making a plea. And what Ruturaj did in Goa is a start to do that. And we have this incredible sketch group started by Dana, who's not here. He didn't get his train ticket in time. An unbelievable body of people. I don't want to mention them for sake of not leaving anyone out, who are present in the Indian situation, that are wanting to make the younger generation realize that you have natural intelligence, you have intuitive intelligence, you have communal intelligence, you have AI intelligence, and that these intelligences, if you have the brain in your hand talking to the autobiography of who you are and opening up the doors to your intuition, with those other skills you can do amazing things. And it's not one without the other. And then just getting back to my house. Okay, the house is not a home unless it's a village. And the ideas of Raumplan and the idea of African space, which is making space, and the site. And what I do here is after breakfast every day, I walk 96 steps, and I get to the top, and I turn slightly due east, and I talk to all of you. I talk to Bharat, I talk to Arjun, I talk to Biju, I talk to Bijoy, and I talk to the goddess of architecture at the Temple of the Sun in Gujarat, who solves most of my problems. And the word namaste is, for me, is looking into one's soul. And I must say, my life has become a better place, and things have become more holistic and in perspective through being part of the architectural jungle of India, as Rahul Malhotra calls it. Thank you very much. Yep, water would be good. Thanks. Thank you. Lovely. okay? And you're in a good place in the world.
Well, Peter, that was incredible. I think we were outside with, I think Surabhi was there, and Goa was overwhelming. So you presented this in Goa, and I mean, after the presentation, it was just, you didn't know what hit you. So it's great. I think you should do this lecture maybe every week, or I mean, we now have the recording, so maybe we can watch it every week so that we get it really into our blood. It was just amazing. I mean, just an amazing.
Pancho taught me that you use every opportunity to do something more. So you don't repeat it. It can be something else. It can evolve. Okay, and it's one of the difficulties you have with posters nowadays, because you like to design posters, but suddenly there's an in-house thing that has a format that can do the poster. Okay. It's a different world.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I thought maybe we'll start with the drawings themselves before we get to, I'd structured a whole bunch of questions that I sent him. But with the drawings, I've now had the incredible opportunity of traveling with you twice. Once, of course, in South Africa with Bharat and Arjun, and we drove across South Africa from Cape Town to Johannesburg in a large black van. Just amazing. I mean, meeting all of these incredible people through these incredible landscapes, and then Peter would stop the car, come, all of us out of the car, and then he would find a place to sit. He would have a box of pastels, and all of us would be made to draw. And it's not that we look at the drawings later and compare them, but just the act of being in that space and drawing, it immediately gives you that embodied memory of having been there, of having seen something really carefully. And I think that's a great lesson. So just to go back to these, the trip yesterday and this trip in Africa, in South Africa, at a very basic level, what are you doing when you're drawing? How are you choosing to see? What is the nature of that frame? What is it that you're after in that moment where you're trying to, capture something in that environment?
Yeah, it's got nothing to do with ego. I think it's fed by that space I was in when I was a younger boy, and I was in almost a meditative state when I drew, and I can still put myself into that space because it's a sacred space, and you're not being marked for what you're doing. You're doing it as a way of talking to you. And then someone like Pancho's encouragement that draw the moment, and someone also like Lloyd Rees that Peter Stashwi talks about, Lloyd Rees.
Richard,
yeah, and he made that generation draw, and there's almost like a sacred act in doing it. It's something you do that's special, like I suppose you do when you go to pray or you do your puja. Okay? So that's where one's at. And sometimes the drawings you draw, you think, oh, I really couldn't draw today. This is awful. And then 3 years later, you look at this drawing, and I say to my son, did you do this? It's fabulous. So you see, it's got to do with that thing. It hasn't got to do with being judgmental.
Right.
And you also, you go to, we saw it with this weekend we had up at Hassan. You walk around, you walk with your camera. Sometimes you can't take pictures. But where's that moment that captures something that's the essence in the darkness that lets the light in? Or is it the base that's gone from rectangular to star-shaped, and there's a something that happens there in that geometry that is just that moment. That's it.
Yeah, I think that the really difficult thing, at least for me, is that while drawing, you're very, very self-conscious in a way. You're trying to draw well so that you can then post it on Instagram or whatever it is. But there's this, again, going back to South Africa, there was this freedom with which you were drawing. I mean, you were just trying to capture the thing that you were seeing without really thinking about or consciously. It seems like a meditative state, a place of a trance.
Yeah, well, when I went with Kuka to the wonderful temple just outside Mysore, he lent me a pen because my pen wasn't working. And I normally draw on a smaller format, but I drew on a bigger format. And I just started drawing. Okay? And he was looking over my shoulder and filming and stuff, and I wanted to say, go away, but I let him be. And I looked at them before I came here today, and I can't wait to finish those drawings. They need a little bit of definition or completion to them, but there are a set of 3 of them, and they, for me, just encompass that place. Okay.
Yeah, also Westridge, I mean, we were lucky to visit the Westridge house, and I'd seen pictures and drawings of the house before coming to South Africa. And so this is a question about drawing and design. So when I visited the house, of course, when you saw the drawings, and you saw the drawings today, you kind of get a sense that it's a very symmetrically organized, there's this kind of order to the building. And even in the drawings that are presented in the books, there's this, it's presented in analytical terms, that you're thinking of the implied diagonal or the axial conditions, etc. But the moment you go to the house, it's actually not like that at all. This embodied experience of a completely visceral, a space that's completely alive, especially the garden, that there's a transition between what you draw or what you imagine as a person designing something, and this imagination of the built artifact, this imagination of embodied experience. What would you say is the relationship between these 2 things when you draw? This idea of drawing to document versus drawing in a way to evoke embodied experience?
Well, there are 2 things with the house. One, I have a formidable collection of African art, contemporary and material art, and it was bought, a fish was bought to swim through the space. So, and in most cases, I had a relationship as a custodian with the artist, so it's part of your autobiography. It's not just art. And that has its own embodiment. And also, Jonathan, my author, says everything I've ever done in the house and landscape has been experimented with somewhere, because you built the house yourself. Right. You know, one of the best things I did was take a sabbatical from university, and with some builders who couldn't read drawings but knew how to do bricks, just built. Right. Okay? And so it's that evolved body experiment. You don't even know how it's going to end up. And I think it's that intimate relationship. And it's interesting, the author wrote a piece called Ambiguity, Appropriation, and something else. There's another A, and Artifact. It's also that, because there's the yes and. And he said to me, I know you had the Smithsons teaching you, and the Smithsons were teaching you about ordinariness and about what they were into. And while they were teaching you, Venturi and them came out with, you know, what's it called? Complexity and contradiction. And the Smithsons were saying that's the most dangerous thing to let any student near, okay? But they said, oddly enough, you've embraced that as well, without realizing it, because you actually love classical order with reverence, but you find it delicious to break the order if you've earned the right to do so, which he said it was mannerism, so I went and looked up mannerism. It sounded cool. And he also said the reason he studied me is I'm quirky. That also seems to be quite cool.
Yeah, but that comes through in your presentation as well, because you draw links that aren't immediately obvious between the Ndebele and I don't know, Corbusier. Yeah. Or, you know, that there are, of course, these links, and people are looking at things, or intuitively when you're designing for well-being, that there are, you know, shared ambitions. But that's enriching for us, because we look at architecture sometimes without this knowledge of precedent, and I think that's really, I mean, in your presentation now and you know, in our repeated viewings, we hope to draw all of these references to things that you're connecting, to see what those connections are, to really understand that.
And the teaching of history in schools of architecture is fundamental. We had 7 teachers of history. And Jennifer, who we stayed with, she was one of 16 in the world studying under Alan Colquhoun in Princeton. And Alan Colquhoun said, you this little white girl who's from a private school, who just knows more than all of us. Why? And she said, I just had these incredible teachers of history, and a lot of them taught the same history in a different way. Right. And Pancho set that provocation up. Right. So the deep embodied knowledge of And you need to understand your Indianness. You know, you have to do both. You have to do what Bawa did. You have to do the body of that, but you have to understand the work you're doing is history now. And you're doing some of the best work in the world.
Taking from that, this idea of education and teaching, you've been involved in a number of schools now, you know, including WCFA, of course, and Avani, and you've also visited at Seed. What are I mean, if I was to ask you what you're really excited about when you see the work that's being produced in colleges here, but also what you're really anxious about in that you see that things are, you know, different or not working?
Yeah, those three institutions are all the byproduct of a couple or an individual who set it going and is still there. You know, it was Rajan Kunjan at Seed. It was Tony and Vivek and his team at Avani. And they've all reached 10 years, and they've suddenly looked at their work. Their students are in this Generation Z thing where they're so overstimulated they can't concentrate, which is a problem. And yet they want to get them excited. And some of the schools are different. Avani is battling with the art-based thing, and then when do you transition into the architecture thing? And Vadia seems pretty consistent, although I've got a group of final years that left me having a bad night's sleep because I was more worried for them than they were for themselves. But it might have just been the wrong 7, I don't know. They've got 3 weeks, and what's the problem? And they don't even have plans, okay? So, and this issue has been really addressed by, but I think the strength is, as I said, it's amazing that certainly at Vadia, when you go and you immerse yourself in a living culture in 2 extremes of climate, one of them in the colder climates, one of them in the warmer climates, and you immerse yourself completely in the social, the making of those historic sites, evolving sites. And what you learn about urban design, what you learn about cultural complexity, I think the advantage a lot of students from good schools have is how in their early years, while they're learning the grammar of the language they speak, tangle with cultural complexity and living cultures. And it just washes off. It just gives you the edge that when you get bombarded with all that other stuff, you can have some ethical and value judgment. Right. And they don't even realize it. So I'm getting them now to draw the furniture as well, because then you become the anthropologist and the sociologist in a simple move. Right. Because and just attend to different cultures that ritual practice and see how they do things. And you made. And what I do in South Africa, when I've got, you know, especially lecturers that are wanting to press the social button too hard, I make them go and live in a squatter camp for 48 hours and see how they deal with body movements, and they soon shut up. Yeah, because you learn very quickly, because that's actually what it's all about. So it's hands-on. And you should interview Nandan, because he was confronted by SEP students, right. You know. And they really said, sir, we sit in this situation where, you know, Doshi had 21 years to do IIM Bangalore. His son-in-law's got 21 weeks to do a scheme of the same complexity. And we see the value in the analog, but we bombarded with less and less time, and what's getting eroded is the human factor. Each shift at the moment, we've got to find the human factor after hours. How do we reconcile that? And he gave very honest answers, you know. And I mean, you can give the Khan thing, work, 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 but it's getting to a point where there are limits. Right. So how we teach a Generation Z, I mean, I've always taught in a provocative way, and then being kind. It's a little bit like being cruel to be kind as a parent. But I think you've got to give discipline. And on my short trip, I've been with Avani since its beginning. We're going to get Avani more grounded now. We're going to actually run a program which grounds you in the principles of architecture. Because a lot of schools actually, if you've got the core of architecture, are going off on these tangents. You know, global warming and anti-colonialism and gender issues. And they just get into the dog chasing its tail. They lead nowhere, not even to identity. And Varki was the one who said, when you put out a program, you need to frame it, and you need to frame its outcomes so that the student's not lost, okay? And they've got, if you've got to give them artistic scope as to the narrative or something, make sure the other things, 70% of it is framed, otherwise the poor student will just get lost. So there's some of those fundamentals, and I don't want to sound like the old guy that's sort of saying we used to do it that way. There's still such a thing as core values, okay?
Yeah, you know, when I was going through Jonathan's book, and it is an incredible book on your, you know, on your practice and on your teachings. One of the things that really struck me was that right at the beginning, you did your thesis on the Ndebele community, really going out there. You showed some amazing images today, but documenting everything, you know, about their lifestyle, about, you know, the architecture. And then later on, when you did Alexandra, the building in Alexandra, the Heritage Center, there also the whole of that heritage precinct, you know, Mandela's Yard, that whole area, you just went alone with a measuring tape, taking help from the residents, measuring everything out, just to get into your blood the architecture, the way people were living. Tell us a little bit about that, about the building in Alexandra, the difficulties with doing that kind of a building in a very, very contentious environment, and what really the role of an architect is in that kind of a really revolutionary social agenda, you know, project that's really rooted in that kind of social ambition.
Well, Mandela stayed in a room in 1942. He'd just gone through, as a 17-year-old, the circumcision rites as a causa, and which is his first trip to being urban. Right. He witnessed the bus boycotts, but he wasn't a political animal yet. So the place he stayed has been the genetic force that generated why we chose that as a precinct. And he said to me, you know, please don't do the Anglophile thing where out of guilt you go and tell this narrative of struggle, because we as Africans are not interested in that. What we're interested in is that families that got dislocated, out of their dislocation came Kwaito music. So I want you can tell the story of struggle, and it's noticeable when the Apartheid Museum, which is a very incredible but exhausting experience, is only visited by people from the Northern Hemisphere. Local Africans say that happened, it's past. What we're interested in is the poetry, the music, the creativity that came out of struggle. So it put you in a different mindset. And he said this building needs to be a catalyst for change, and it's going to get caught in political immobility, but you need to give ownership to the community, and the community have gone and signed all the stones. And the project was stopped for 5 years because of some head of the funder, which is a government department, had some trouble on one of her sites in South Africa, so she stopped all the, and not one brick was stolen. But there was a community involvement. And in South Africa, you've got to involve the community. You've got to give them ownership. If you don't, they will demolish the building before it's opened. So that was the reality of it. And so I'm part of that community. They've seen my worth. And also, you know, the poor need to work for something. You can't just give them handouts. So I need to get that building active. And then Nandan wants to run a major project with the Indian government, where we fulfill the late Tata's wish of addressing the problems of the urban poor, headed by maybe 15 leading people from the world. And we share that common thing. But when I did that building, it's like when you're to improvise in music, you need to have actually done classical music in order to earn the right to improvise. So underlying that building, although it's in a poor area, there's an incredible beauty, there's an incredible measured proportioning system and things that happen which just give it that sublime quality. which underpins the rawness of the context it's in. And it's also not about form. It's something that's open-ended and asking you to grow. So that's probably my greatest experiment.
Yeah, it's an incredible building. I mean, we were there, and I mean, it does everything. I mean, it has a little bit of cob. I mean, it's this erudite, really, wonderful building that then is also Lina Bobardi, before Lina Bobardi, this incredible artifact in that context.
I think our context today, it's, in Doshi's era, and that you didn't really attribute things. It wasn't part of the culture. Today, I think it's just good manners to mention with pride those people who've inspired you. And my son sometimes says, "Dad, why are you trying so hard? Lina Bobardi's done the staircase better than you. Just reuse it and give her credit and see if she has a bank account."
Now that's going too far. Also, this work in China, I'm really curious about it. I mean, that drawing, that project in China, that drawing is just unbelievable. So tell us about working in a foreign context. I mean, I don't know how much time you had. This question from the students is a really pertinent one. Did you have the time to really embrace that culture, to find a way to then engage with it, with architecture? How did you prepare yourself to work in such a foreign, I believe, such a foreign context?
Well, you arrive in this beautiful valley. It's not, I don't know China, I just know this beautiful valley. And you've got this crazy, lateral thinking Buddhist existing in a communist country uncomfortably, who wants to be an architect.
This is the client?
The client, yeah. And he wants to build this in his lifetime, and then he declares to you while he's counting on his beads that his guru is in India and he's a Buddhist and you've been sent by Buddha, and that's great, okay? And then we taught him to draw, so we communicate on WeChat. He sends me a drawing and I send him a drawing. We should do a little book on how you can run a contract by that. We only do, and then he owner built the landscape, but when we got to buildings, and they're formidable hotels and that, we said to him, but you need operators, and you need project management. And Mr. Jin, you can't just do everything on your own, and you need a master plan. And he's telling you to do, go do. And we do concept design, and there isn't the dialogue we used to in the West. It's just you do, then you show, then me give you this. And then you do more. And then you do detailed design. You've got to explain to the guy, we can't give you the 3D render until we've done the detailed design, concept design, because the one is the other. And then they build it 99% correct. Because you're not involved after that stage, and you've got no legal obligations. So it's like this free hand to be creative. But the government has stepped in now as a partner, and they've said, you better turn the 58 apartments and the 228-bed hotels, room hotels, into a return before we do the next phase. So, we've started to get them to understand that actually if you discuss things, you can actually get a better outcome than not discussing them. Okay.
Well, I think we'll open to some questions, but
But the spirit, the symbolic thing is there. Right. The Christians kill the dragons, they love the dragon. And then you've got the common ground with the lotus flower, and then you've got the phoenix, and you've got all of those things, and they've lost their culture, so you have to actually take them to vestiges of their culture to show them the value in that, okay? And how you can bring that in, and how you can do this, and it can have significant meaning artistically to you, as opposed to just being another theme park. And the cut line, he told me he wants me to be the Gaudi of China or something. So I said, oh, great, let's go off to Gaudi and I'll educate you on Gaudi. But when you do that sort of work, there's a cut line, a thin line between it being kitsch and being extraordinary. Right. And you've got to make him understand that. So we do a different type of dance when we're there.
Yeah,
And
you were saying that some of the drawings you were changing the way that you drew from your experience of Chinese art, or I don't know. I
yes,
mean, there was this.
yes.
Yeah.
And the block of flats we've done is I showed it to Kevin. And he said there's a lot of influences from the modern movement that the Jews did in Hillbrow and Johannesburg between the two world wars in China. I said, shh. They're part of who you are.
You shouldn't show Kevin any work because he'll then immediately know the reference, and we'd be bankrupt based on your. Well, Peter, it's just always an incredible joy to be with you. I mean, there's this charge of energy now. You know, tomorrow, of course, we're traveling, but the moment Diwali's over, you're itching to go and draw because you think maybe by just seeing this lecture again and again that you would have figured out maybe if I did the sky this way that it would look a bit like Peter's drawings. We'll open up to some questions. I hope that we'll get some from the audience, and then Peter's here for a bit. So, questions?
Sumitro.
Thank you, Peter, it was a roller coaster ride. Thank you for sharing years of what you've really looked into, and I think we have to see it much more and deeper to understand more. I had one question which is more to do with, since you've been involved with colleges and and you are perhaps very aware of what's happening in South Africa with the contemporary generation of students and their learnings and their references, and how do you, are there similarities between, one is the contemporary architectural practices and directions, and as well as how the students are looking at it?
Yeah, good question. No, I've got a speaker here. It's students around the world are similar, but they're different due to the context that they're in. What I find, Indian students, there's less entitlement, and there's still reverence. I mean, when 2012, when that young architectural student, female architecture student in Trivandrum said to me, "Sir, please can you give us your eyes so through drawing we can learn to see?" I nearly cried, you know. I mean, and then the next day 160 students rock up at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning. That's not going to happen anywhere else in the world, especially on a Sunday, okay? And I think, you know, what I try and do with Indian students is make them realize that the grass isn't greener and you've actually got a depth of shoulders to stand on. It's no longer just Doshi and Korea, it's your generation that have come out of that. You've just got to layer it. You've got to take the 60s and then the people that are turning 60, and then you move down. And you're doing some of the best work in the world, and you've got to start believing in yourself. And the other thing is to say to your students, you know, go home, those of you that speak a different language, and there are many of you do, go and speak to your grandparents and ask them about front door, threshold of entry into a courtyard, in your language, and find out the added meaning, which is very different from the glib term you use in English. So by all means, you're part of a greater world, but understand you're actually sitting with gold. Doshi said the clues are in the situation. The best philosophy is the one that comes from the situation. It's actually lying all there for you to go and actually grab. And the vernacular is not something that's, oh, we don't want to see old stuff. It's an evolving organism in itself. So take the good manners from that project we won in Rwanda, that New Green City. We actually took the good manners that we learned from tribals, which we gave to the Britishers, because they didn't know that because they hadn't been there. Okay? And it's actually those good manners, and they're actually spatial constructs and social constructs that we've brought into the urban design thing, which has made it actually so much more usable and user-friendly to first-generation urban people. You've been urban for 8,000 years. These are Africans who've never been urban. They've never lived in anything other than a single story in a courtyard, and you're now putting them on a 4th floor. How do you make an architecture that's enabling? And then in South Africa, post-democracy, you can't get a post if you're white. You get marginalized, and you're getting people who are teaching who did some obscure degree somewhere in Russia and have very little to offer. But the younger generation, the 20-year-olds and that, are now saying, enough. We want the good teachers, and we want the people who have knowledge. And I've just been in, they realized that my generation under Pancho actually did this move from modernism and colonialism, which they play lip service to, and need to be engaged. So I'm suddenly, running Sunday walk-ins like Kuke and Chaya do. So there's a turning of the tide, and wokeness is out. And this overindulgence on the social ticket or the a social architecture being the thing of the poor and us becoming other disciplines. It mustn't be at the expense of your core discipline of understanding the grammar of the architect that you talk architecture about. And those are essentially basics. And you get good at design through doing design, not through talking about design. And your people skills and everything benefit. So the clock has really turned. It's getting back to core principles. And as I said, there are 3 schools I've had recent dealings with. Avani, I'm part of from the beginning. The Vadia school is always excellent. When you go there, they always show you this is who we are through, not what we talk about, but through the work. The work's actually what speaks. Okay? And I think there's both schools. You got to look at. You mustn't get complacent. Pancho always used to bring a whistleblower into the mix that would actually put the cat amongst the pigeons, that would liven things up a bit. You need to do that. And maybe that's through a program you're running. We're going to run a program with Avani. You're going to run it on R.M. Schindler's work. But the staff in the school are going to research R.M. Schindler training under Wagner and Lewis. What did he learn? Then he went and worked on the Tokyo Hotel with Frank Lloyd Wright. What did he learn? And then he did one of the first houses in 1921, and then did work which is so seminal. That's all governed by principle, and wrote an essay 70 years ago on that architecture is about space, and he evolved the modular system before Corp. So suddenly, when you travel abroad and you meet good architects, you go and talk to their wives and you say, has your husband ever gone to see Schindler? They said, that's his top secret, yeah. So we're going to get students to take three houses with principles, and then choose one and then apply those principles to a house in this situation. So it's going to be rigorous, but it's going to combine the theory teachers, it's going to combine the makers, because it's got to do with furniture, it's going to combine the design staff, and it's going to combine the product industrial designers all in one. And we're going to do it as a term exercise. But the students are going to have each done that research. They're also going to get into the headspace of what it was like in Vienna when Wittgenstein and Freud and these guys were all there. What did that do to a young man? Then ask you, in your Indian situation, what's the mindset? Where are you? Yeah.
Thanks for the acknowledging discovering the presence of and then saying that the visceral drawings, which comes out just being present and expanding the presence. So my question is, how did you move from this to allegorical conception and drawings? So I think there are 2 polarities actually in your work. And the allegorical process, which if you can explain more where it origins and what it does, because most of the students come with their own allegorical time and space. And then they are put through some kind of linear kind of a thing. So how does one negotiate between these two polarities? And what you talked about, the women of Africa, how they try to explain their cosmological time and worldviews actually.
Something I did on this particular trip was, I did it at Avani. So can I answer?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I took a piece of paper and I got a student to present their work. And as they were presenting their work, I tried to draw what they were telling me about sight, what they were telling me about idea, and what they were telling me about how it was ordered or organized. And then I was showing them how quickly, and then if it wasn't clear to me to draw those, I was saying to you, you need to communicate that. That's something, and it became quite a nice discussion because they could see I said, I'm here to actually help you with your thesis, but I can only help you and respect what you're doing if you can communicate what you're doing. Okay? And then I drew the essence of what I understood they were communicating. So it was one way of breaking that down. And the other thing is, I don't think just design, I think also construction, it's good. It's very, you can work very quickly freehand. Okay? So you need to make them aware that they're different intelligences. The one just doesn't replace the other. Okay? And what tends to happen is, what we're pushing in design is, something like Revit makes you think in form before you've even resolved the plan. And architecture is about the plan and section. And then form, and that is a consequence of that. So we're using that as a discipline. A plan should be something that's beautiful, okay? And the section should generate the form. But you can also think of something but form, but it's not just the plan that's the generator, it's also the roofs that's the generator. And then we're saying to students, you know, your autobiography of what you, from the first time you can remember, which is about 3.5 to when you enter architectural school, is here, but it's not in the library of your computer. And neither is your access. Maybe your access to intuition is through the computer. Maybe someone like Kevin has been there. I don't know. But just think of that personal knowledge that you didn't, which when you draw allows you access, because the brain in your hand talks to the brain there. So what are you replacing that with? Because your library is quite limited. And you are getting theses that are fantastic renders, but they don't relate to the plan. Okay? And so it's a difficult phase, but we're trying to get students to understand that if you've got the multiple intelligences, you can just be a better architect.
How do you get the allegorical in young? How do you get a young student to think that way, or to come back to that after having had all of that schooling, kind of draw that out of him?
Sure. The generational thing, I mean, I've got a 24-year-old Generation Z who started work with me. You met him. He started a month ago, and he does my work, and then he's into this, and then he's into that, and it might have nothing to do with the practice, and and I'm trying to say to him, you know, don't you ever find time to actually just be at peace and that, but there's like this multiple task thing that sort of escalates to unbelievable levels, you know? You're watching your cell phone when you kiss your girlfriend. I don't know what's happening, you know? So I don't know how to deal with that. And yet he's actually going places that I couldn't go in an incredibly wonderful way. So there's another thinking thing. And I think all of the schools are but what we must do is, in trying to come to terms with how we teach that, we mustn't sacrifice the fundamentals, because they're central to it. I mean, I've just been at Cookie's house, you know, and you know, it's just sublime because at every level, the proportions, the material choice, the rhythm, a kitchen that actually everything floats. It's like a major work of art, and it's beautiful and it works. And it all comes from the fundamentals, and it comes from precedent.
There's a question in the back.
Sir, I'm too mesmerized to even begin with. And my question might sound silly, but I'll still ask. So one thing is, as an artist, how have you been able to maintain the consistency in your drawings? And the second, since rituals constitute a major part of our local, how have you ever also spent time drawing those rituals? We can see that as an output of symbols in your drawings, but have you actually ever sat and drawn those rituals which happen around?
Is it saying rituals or rituals?
Rituals, yeah.
Rituals.
How do you document rituals, and how do you keep consistency in your drawings over time?
When I worked with the tribals, the rituals were best documented in film. Okay, I became a film director for 1.5 years, and that was that way. But it also, in the drawings I've done of the tribals, I have plans that show how space is used ritually and how it's used when the ritual isn't there. I think it's something that needs to be done in the documentation you're doing of living cultures. Okay? And it's very important. And, you know, Joseph Campbell said that mythology should come into every discipline.
Mythology?
Mythology, yeah, should be taught in every discipline because it's very, very important. And we need to, and part of my interest is, it's in my book, in the last thing, is I like visiting the circumstantial, the ordinary, and the spiritual in any situation because I find it very enriching. But with deference and respect, okay? And I believe we're equal, but we're different, and the difference is what interests me. And I think it's part of the problem that the Anglophile world has, that because it equates that you have to be equal, it has difficulty dealing with something that's different to the Anglophile mindset, so it tends to reject it. You need to become like us or we can't accept you. And it's nonsense. And then there's also the construct of, Doshi's construct of that the Western world lives by the false construct of certainty and perfection, and all of its paranoias are a consequence of that unreality, whereas the Indian world works with the construct of uncertainty as the reality and agent of change, which allows you to fail and learn from your mistakes. And it's far more constructive. And when I've got students from Aalto University in Helsinki or from Arkansas in America to come to Africa and presented that alternative construct of uncertainty, it's completely changed the way they think. And they've actually, been overjoyed by the fact that they made that paradigm shift.
Hi, sir. So my question is kind of metaphor related. So I was actually mesmerized when I saw your sketches of especially Humpy and Halibeed. It seemed like they're there in your sketches. So is it like you converse with those spaces and then you get into it sketches, or they are just still, you just can sketch me now? Does conversation happen between you, and can it be instilled? I mean, can it be learned, or is it like it happens just by chance? And is there one question? And second question, is there any other space that you would love to sketch again and again?
Look, I've only included 1/3 of the sketches. It was, I had like 400 slides and I had to reduce it to 250. So I don't think there's any disconnect between what you learn historically from sketching ancient spaces. I also like to sketch everyday India, not just the great monuments, the streetscapes. the density, the thickness, you walking into the poles in Ahmedabad and you turn a corner and there's a piece of ad hocism on the corner, and it's just absolutely deals with, it's got the Otler, which is the privacy gradient, it's got the extensions which actually come to keep out the monsoon winds, it's got a way of turning the corner. Those they're just 1,001 lessons to learn. I tended to show the more religious spaces and not the everyday. And yeah, and then, I mean, the good work of Doshis and the good work of Koreas have all come through them making housing into more of a cluster with a sense of belonging by virtue of what they learnt in the village. So that's the transition one's looking for. And I look for contemporary architects who've done housing in India that you still have a sense of belonging. And there are some good examples of that. I'll give a lecture on that alone. So I understand you're a writer and a poet, okay? So the business of writing, Johanni Palasma is very interesting because he was a practicing architect, and then he had to go into exile in Africa, and while he was in Africa, he learned to write. Okay, and he talks about the different mindset from being a designer and being a writer. You almost have to switch into a completely different mental mode. So I think, you know, relative to you as a writer asking those questions, you need to understand. But you know what architects do is a tribal said to me, we see what we want to see and we make it our own. That's what we do. We see what we want to see. But in making it our own, we reinterpret it and invest it with new symbolic meaning in a different context, and it takes on a whole different meaning because of that. Cookie's lessons of Scarpa and other people are, it's no longer Scarpa, it's sort of Hindu Zen. But you can actually see where he's learned from. You can see from his books, but it's uniquely here. And it's much richer because of that, and it's actually better than Scarpa because it's not as self-indulgent.
I think we have time for one last question. There's one right at the back there.
Hi. You spoke about quick drawing, rough drawing, and drawing reconstruction. So I think my question would be, what in your head or in your mind is the difference between a quick and a rough drawing?
Oh, they're both delightful. It's also the mood you're in, the time you're in, the circumstances you're in, you know, just the spontaneity, yeah. But you're also compelled. I mean, most of the Indian work and the Malian work, I did ask myself, if I don't actually do a drawing now, I will never have a record of this moment in the same way. So it's a celebration of just doing that, not procrastinating. And it's interesting, we're doing this exhibition on these 5 Americans we took 10 years after my first visit. And they predominantly took pictures. There's a few sketches we've included, and Robert and I have like 200 sketches, which are a different interrogation, because you're using drawing as a thinking tool. I'm not saying you can't use drawing as a thinking tool as a photographer. In fact, we've got Giovanni Vio, whose father restored St. Marco's from Venice, who's got 20 photographs that we're going to have to mount differently because he photographs the ordinary, but they're absolutely sublime. They need a book on their own. You can just see he's got the photographer's eye. It's different to everyone else's work.
Well, thank you, Peter. That was quite incredible. It's great we had this time after the lecture as well for questions. So thank you, Peter, again. It was amazing.
Thank you.
And thanks to Sabha, to Raghu, and of course our videographer, and also the YouTube Live. Also thanks to Rakesh for the book, and thanks for all, Thanks, of course, to Ram Ceramics and PC Sampath. I mean, without them, we wouldn't have this event. So thank you, and thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. And I wish you well to use the space. It's magnificent.
I learned more about